Amid the luxury of a restaurant, a foreign woman isolated by an unfamiliar language becomes the target of impatient stares, until someone unexpected changes everything with just one word. In the Central District of Boston, on a cold and rainy afternoon, Amber Restaurant shone like a beacon for the local elite. Its fogged windows reflected the comings and goings of imported cars stopping under the elegant marquee. Inside, the atmosphere exuded exclusivity, perfectly aligned silverware, gleaming glasses, impeccably dressed waiters, and hushed conversations accompanied by fine dishes and expensive wines. The maître d' Andrew observed everything with eagle eyes, ensuring that every detail was perfect for the regular patrons, business people, politicians, and influencers who made Amber their favorite meeting place. The rain fell mercilessly outside, forming small pools on the cobblestone sidewalks that characterized Boston's historic center. The gray sky contrasted with the amber lighting of the restaurant, creating a golden aura that seemed to separate this space from the ordinary world beyond its doors. That's when the entrance door opened and a cold gust of wind invaded the heated environment. A woman entered alone without an umbrella, with raindrops glistening on her beige coat. Her light brown hair, slightly damp, framed a face with delicate features. She looked around curiously, as if absorbing every detail of the place. Andrew, the maître d', approached with a hesitant expression. Amber didn't usually receive clients without reservations, especially on a busy Friday. "Good afternoon, madam. May I help you?" The woman smiled and said something in a language that Andrew didn't understand. He noticed the French accent and tried again, this time in English. "Do you have a reservation, madame?" The woman frowned, looking confused, and responded in French again. The gazes of the customers began to turn toward the entrance, observing the unusual scene unfolding. Andrew, visibly embarrassed, made a gesture inviting her in and led her to a table near the window, one of the few available. "Raphael," he called softly to one of the younger waiters. "Do you speak any French?" The young man shook his head negatively, while both watched the woman settle in with natural elegance, placing her handbag on the chair beside her. "Who could she be?" A female customer asked her companion at a nearby table. "I've never seen her around here." "Probably some lost tourist," the man replied, turning his attention back to the plate in front of him. Across the street, sheltering from the rain under the marquee of a closed shop, Ethan observed the movement. At 13, his thin body shivered with cold inside his faded hoodie, the only shelter against the inclement weather. His eyes, however, shone with the curiosity and intelligence that always impressed the few people who really noticed him. The son of unknown parents, Ethan had grown up between shelters and the streets. But unlike many in his situation, the boy had found refuge in public libraries, where he spent hours devouring books of all kinds. His special passion was languages. He had learned English with surprising ease and, in the last 2 years, had immersed himself in French, fascinated by the sounds he had discovered on an old CD of French songs that a librarian had given him. That afternoon, while deciding where to spend the next few hours escaping the rain, Ethan noticed the unusual movement in the restaurant. He saw when the woman entered and, out of curiosity, moved a little closer. The large glass windows allowed him to observe the scene unfolding inside Amber. Inside the restaurant, Raphael approached the foreigner's table, offering the menu with a nervous smile. The woman, Hannah Bennett as they would later learn, opened the menu and her eyes scanned the pages with growing confusion. After a few minutes, she tried to place her order, but the language barrier was evident. Raphael called Andrew, who tried again in English and even in rudimentary Spanish without success. Discomfort spread throughout the restaurant. The other customers exchanged glances, some annoyed at the interruption of the normally tranquil atmosphere, others simply curious. Hannah began to show frustration, her fingers gently drumming on the table as she tried, once again, to communicate. Ethan, who was watching everything through the window, could hear fragments of the conversation each time the door opened for someone's entry or exit. He immediately recognized the language. Without thinking much, he approached the restaurant entrance. The security guard at the door gave him a stern look. "Don't even think about it, kid. Go find somewhere else to beg for food." "That's not it," replied Ethan, unintimidated. "I know what that lady is saying. I can help." The man laughed with disdain. "Yeah, right, and I'm Brad Pitt. Get out of here before I call the police." Inside the restaurant, the situation was becoming increasingly tense. Hannah, normally calm and controlled, felt exposed and vulnerable. She had arrived in Boston only 2 days ago, sent by the French company where she worked to evaluate potential investments in the region. She hadn't expected so many difficulties with the language, since there were always interpreters at formal meetings. Now, in a moment of leisure, she found herself isolated in a strange environment. That's when she noticed the boy at the door, gesturing while talking to the security guard. For an instant, their gazes crossed through the glass, and Hannah felt a strange connection. There was something in those young eyes, an intelligence, a depth that immediately intrigued her. Andrew approached her table again. "Madame, je suis désolé, mais—" he tried, using the few French words he knew. Hannah pointed to the door. "That boy," she said in French. "Let him in." Andrew followed her gaze, confused, and saw Ethan being pushed away by the security guard. "Madame?" Hannah stood up to everyone's surprise and walked to the door. The customers watched open-mouthed as the elegant foreigner opened the door and called the street boy with a gesture. "Vous parlez français?" she asked with a hopeful look. Ethan's face lit up. "Oui, madame. Je parle un peu de français," he replied with impressively correct pronunciation for a self-taught speaker. Hannah smiled for the first time since entering the restaurant. She turned to Andrew and, with unequivocal gestures, made it clear that she wanted the boy to accompany her. The maitre d' hesitated, torn between pleasing a customer and maintaining the establishment's standards. Finally, he reluctantly nodded, allowing Ethan to enter. A murmur of astonishment ran through the dining room when the boy in simple clothes and tousled hair walked between the tables until he reached Hannah's table. "Merci beaucoup d'être venu m'aider," she said, indicating the chair across from her. "De rien, madame," replied Ethan, sitting down with a mixture of shyness and determination. "Comment puis-je vous aider?" And so, in the heart of that exclusive restaurant, amid looks of surprise and distrust, an unlikely connection began that would forever change the lives of Hannah Bennett, the French executive, and Ethan, the boy who had learned French from books borrowed from Boston's public libraries. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. Amber Restaurant had transformed into a stage for the most unusual scene its patrons had ever witnessed. On one side of the table, Hannah Bennett with her European elegance and designer clothes. On the other, Ethan, with worn sneakers and a hoodie that had seen better days. The disparity between them was so evident that it almost seemed like an artistic staging about social contrasts. But there was something more there, something that transcended external appearances. As they conversed in French, they created a private bubble where external differences dissolved, giving way to fluid and natural communication. Hannah was visibly impressed with the boy's fluency. "How did you learn to speak French so well?" she asked while Ethan translated the menu options. The boy hesitated for a moment, his eyes briefly lowering to his hands with short, clean nails, a detail that Hannah immediately noticed. "At the public library, ma'am. They have many books and some CDs for learning languages. Miss Margaret, one of the librarians, taught me the basics, and then I continued on my own." Hannah nodded, realizing there was much more to the story than Ethan was sharing. "And your parents, do they speak French too?" The question hung in the air for a few seconds. Ethan took a deep breath before answering, maintaining the composure that had accompanied him since childhood in the most difficult moments. "I don't have parents, Mom. I grew up in shelters, but now I manage on my own." Hannah felt a knot in her throat. The simple and direct response, without self-pity, touched her deeply. This boy had something rare, a dignity that many adults with all opportunities would never develop. Raphael, the waiter, approached the table with a curious and cautious expression. He observed the fluid dialogue between the foreign customer and the street boy, still incredulous at what he was seeing. "He says the wild mushroom risotto is the house specialty," translated Ethan, with a small smile. Hannah placed her order, and Ethan transmitted it perfectly to the waiter, who walked away still perplexed. At the surrounding tables, the initial looks of disapproval had given way to expressions of surprise and, in some cases, genuine admiration. "Aren't you hungry?" asked Hannah, noticing that Ethan hadn't ordered anything. The boy looked away, embarrassed. I can't pay, ma'am. I insist, she replied firmly. Consider it payment for the translation. Choose whatever you want. After a moment of hesitation, Ethan accepted and chose the same dish as Hannah. His posture, initially tense, began to gradually relax, although his eyes remained alert, like those of someone accustomed to always being on the defensive. At a table not far away, Emily Mendoza, a well-known cultural promoter in the city, observed the scene with growing interest. She immediately recognized Hannah Bennett, the French executive whose arrival in Boston had been discreetly reported in business circles. What she didn't understand was the presence of that boy at her table, and even more surprising, the fact that they conversed with such naturalness. "Do you know who that woman is?" asked Marcus, her assistant, who accompanied her at lunch. "Hannah Bennett from Lumiere International," replied Emily, without taking her eyes off the table. "She's in the city to evaluate investments in the cultural sector. I tried to schedule a meeting with her, but her agenda is completely booked." "And the boy?" "That's what intrigues me," she replied, slightly raising her wine glass. "But I have the feeling we're witnessing something special." At the table, the conversation between Hannah and Ethan flowed more and more naturally. The boy had set aside part of his initial reserve and now spoke about his passion for languages, how he had learned English by watching subtitled films in the library, and how French fascinated him with its musicality. "One day, I want to visit Paris," he confided, his eyes shining in a way that moved Hannah. "See the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, walk along the Seine." "It's a wonderful city," she confirmed. "But do you know what enchants me most about Paris? The small bookstores, the hidden cafes, the street musicians. The places tourists rarely discover." The dishes arrived, momentarily interrupting the conversation. Ethan observed the impeccable presentation of the risotto, hesitating before picking up his fork. Hannah noticed his discomfort. "Start from the edge. It's cooler there," she guided him in French, naturally, as if she were just giving a culinary tip and not a discreet etiquette lesson. Ethan followed the suggestion, and soon both were savoring the meal. The boy ate with controlled appetite, but Hannah perceived that it was probably the best meal he had had in a long time. Between one forkful and another, the conversation continued. Hannah explained that she was in Boston for work, representing a company that invested in cultural projects around the world. Ethan, in turn, spoke about his favorite places in the city: the public garden at dawn when almost no one was there, the Boston Public Library where he spent hours, and Franklin Park, where he sometimes got small jobs helping street vendors. "Do you attend school?" asked Hannah, trying to better understand the boy's situation. Ethan fidgeted with his napkin, avoiding her gaze for the first time. "I used to before, but it's complicated without having a fixed address. Social workers tried to put me in shelters several times, but I always ended up leaving." "Why?" "I prefer my freedom," he replied with a disturbing maturity for someone so young. "In shelters, there are too many rules, too many children, little attention. Out here, I can go to the library when I want. I can choose where to sleep, what to do." Hannah felt a tightness in her chest. The freedom that Ethan described was, in fact, a form of survival that no child should need to develop. But there was something in this boy's determination, in the way he had created his own path in such adverse circumstances, that deeply impressed her. Meanwhile, Andrew, the maitre d', observed the interaction from afar with mixed feelings. At first, he had considered asking Ethan to leave after helping with the translation, but something in the way Hannah interacted with the boy made him reconsider. The restaurant had rigorous standards, of course, but it also valued customer satisfaction, especially someone of Hannah Bennett's caliber. The meal came to an end, and Hannah asked for the bill. Ethan began to get up, presuming his function had ended, but Hannah gently indicated that he should wait. "I have a proposal for you, Ethan," she said, switching to English with a strong accent, surprising the boy. "I need an interpreter during my stay in Boston. Someone who knows the city and can help me in less formal situations when I'm not with the work team." The boy's eyes widened. "But I'm not a professional interpreter, ma'am. I've never done this before." "You just did, and very well," she smiled. "It's a temporary job, but it will be properly compensated. What do you think?" Ethan remained silent, processing the unexpected offer. It was an opportunity he never imagined having, not just for the money. which would certainly make a difference in his life. But for the chance to practice French, to meet someone from another world, to have a completely new experience. "I accept," he finally replied with a firm voice. "Thank you for the opportunity." Hannah smiled, satisfied, and handed him a card with the address of the hotel where she was staying. "Tomorrow at 9 in the morning. We can talk more about the details." When they stood up to leave, Emily took the opportunity and approached, introducing herself to Hannah with the ease of someone who is accustomed to circulating in the most exclusive environments. "Miss Bennett, what a pleasure to meet you. I'm Emily Mendoza, director of the Boston Cultural Foundation. I tried to schedule a meeting with you, but I understand your agenda is quite busy." Hannah greeted her politely, while Ethan observed the interaction, suddenly conscious of the contrast between his own appearance and the sophistication of these two women. He felt out of place, ready to silently disappear when Hannah did something unexpected. "This is a happy coincidence, Miss Mendoza," replied Hannah, gently placing her hand on Ethan's shoulder. "I was just commenting to my young assistant about Lumiere's genuine interest in learning more about the city's cultural scene." Emily looked at Ethan with evident confusion, but maintained her professional smile. "Your assistant?" "Temporary," clarified Hannah, "and surprisingly efficient. Perhaps we can arrange something for next week. Ethan can organize this in our schedule." The boy, caught by surprise, assumed the role with admirable composure. "Certainly, ma'am. I'll check the available times." As they walked to the exit, accompanied by the curious glances of other customers, Hannah whispered to Ethan, "I hope I didn't put you in a difficult situation." "Not at all," he replied with a small smile. "I think I just got my first formal job." The rain had ceased when they left the restaurant, leaving in the air that characteristic smell of wet asphalt. Hannah called a taxi and before getting in looked at Ethan one last time. "Until tomorrow, then?" "Until tomorrow," he confirmed with a new confidence in his gaze. The Magnifique Hotel, one of the most luxurious in Boston, displayed its imposing neoclassical facade under the timid morning sun. In the lobby, decorated with Italian marble and crystal chandeliers, uniformed staff circulated discreetly, attending to guests with the silent efficiency that characterized the establishment. At 9 o'clock sharp, Ethan stopped in front of the hotel, observing the movement through the glass doors. He had spent the night awake, divided between excitement for the unexpected opportunity and fear of not being up to the trust that Hannah had placed in him. Before dawn, he went to the public bathroom in Copley Square, where he washed himself as best he could. He wore the only T-shirt without tears that he owned, white, slightly yellowed by time, and jeans that, although faded, were clean. His dark hair, normally rebellious, had been carefully combed with water. He took a deep breath and entered the hotel, immediately feeling the gazes of the staff upon him. The receptionist, a middle-aged man with an impassive expression, observed him with suspicion. "May I help you?" he asked in a tone that clearly suggested he doubted the boy had any legitimate reason to be there. "Good morning," replied Ethan, maintaining the upright posture he had rehearsed. "I'm here to see Ms. Hannah Bennett. She's expecting me." The man arched an eyebrow. "Your name?" "Ethan. Ethan Oliver." The receptionist checked something on the computer, his skepticism evident. After a moment of hesitation, he picked up the phone and dialed Hannah's room number, speaking in a low voice. The expression of surprise that followed made it clear that confirmation had been made. "Ms. Bennett asked for you to wait in the lobby," he informed, indicating a waiting area with leather armchairs. "She'll be down in a few minutes." Ethan thanked him and headed to the indicated spot, feeling out of place among the well-dressed guests passing by. He sat on the edge of an armchair, hands on his knees, discreetly observing the luxurious environment around him. A waiter serving late breakfast stared at him for a few moments, as if trying to determine whether to offer his services or ask him to leave. While waiting, Ethan's mind was buzzing. What exactly did Hannah expect from him? What would it be like to work as an informal interpreter for an international executive? And more importantly, why had she chosen him of all people? His thoughts were interrupted by Hannah's arrival. She emerged from the elevator wearing a light grey pantsuit with a natural elegance that made several guests turn their heads to observe her. Upon spotting Ethan, her face lit up with a genuine smile. "Bonjour, Ethan." she greeted, extending her hand. Punctual, I like that. The boy stood up quickly, a bit awkwardly, and shook her hand. Bonjour, Madame Bennett. Hannah, please, she corrected. Shall we have breakfast while we discuss the details of your work? Before Ethan could respond, Hannah was already guiding him to the hotel restaurant. The maître d' led them to a table by the window, overlooking the internal gardens. Ethan sat rigidly, conscious of the curious glances from other customers, while Hannah seemed perfectly at ease. Have you eaten? She asked while examining the menu. Not yet, admitted Ethan, looking nervously at the multiple utensils arranged in front of him. Hannah ordered for both: coffee, orange juice, breads, cheeses, and fresh fruits. When the waiter walked away, she rested her elbows on the table, interlacing her fingers under her chin, and observed Ethan with genuine interest. So, Ethan, tell me more about yourself. Yesterday our conversation was interrupted several times. The boy hesitated, uncomfortable with the direct attention. His life wasn't exactly the kind of story one shared in elegant breakfast cafes. There's not much to tell, ma'am. Hannah, he corrected himself. As I said yesterday, I grew up in shelters. My mother left me at an orphanage when I was 2 years old. I never knew my father. Hannah nodded without showing pity, something that Ethan immediately appreciated. He hated when people looked at him with that mixture of commiseration and discomfort. And how did you learn French? You mentioned the library. Ethan's face visibly animated when talking about this. Yes, the Boston Public Library. I started going there to escape the cold. When I was about 8 years old, Miss Margaret, one of the librarians, noticed that I was always alone and began showing me interesting books. He paused when the coffee arrived, thanking the waiter with a politeness that surprised even himself. One day, she showed me a section of books in other languages, he continued. I started with English because I thought it would be more useful. Then I found a book of stories in French with illustrations. So I didn't understand anything, but the images helped me guess the meaning. Miss Margaret noticed my interest and gave me an old CD of French songs that belonged to her son. Hannah smiled, serving herself coffee. And you learned by yourself, listening to songs and reading books? Yes, more or less. Then I discovered that the library offered access to computers with internet. I found some free online courses and tutorials on YouTube. He shrugged, as if it were nothing extraordinary. I have a facility for languages. That's an understatement, commented Hannah, genuinely impressed. Your pronunciation is remarkable for someone who never had formal classes. Breakfast proceeded in a surprisingly fluid conversation. Hannah explained that she was in Boston to evaluate potential investments from Lumiere International in local cultural projects. The company, one of the largest in Europe in the arts promotion sector, was looking to expand its presence in North America, and Boston was a priority market. I have formal meetings with authorities and business people in the morning, usually with professional interpreters, she explained. But in the afternoon and early evening, I like to get to know the city more authentically, visit smaller cultural spaces, independent galleries, local theaters. That's where you can help me. Ethan nodded, beginning to understand his role. I can show you places that aren't in the tourist guides. Exactly, smiled Hannah. I need to see the real culture of the city, not just what they want to show me in official presentations. After coffee, Hannah handed Ethan an envelope. Here's an advance for your work. We also need to resolve another issue. The boy looked at the envelope without opening it, a momentary expression of distrust crossing his face. What issue? Your appearance, replied Hannah directly but without judgment in her voice. If you're going to accompany me to meetings and events, we need appropriate clothes. Ethan felt his face burn with shame. Of course, his clothes weren't appropriate for the environments that Hannah frequented. He suddenly felt foolish for believing he could be part of that world, even temporarily. Hannah, noticing his discomfort, lightly touched his hand. It's not about you, Ethan. It's just a practical matter. Consider it as a work uniform. He nodded, still embarrassed. I understand. Great. I've already asked the concierge to recommend some nearby stores. We can go now before my first appointment at 11 o'clock. 2 hours later, Ethan barely recognized the young man who stared back at him in the clothing store mirror. He wore perfectly fitted dark dress pants, a light blue Egyptian cotton shirt, and a navy blazer that, according to the saleswoman, highlighted his eyes. His feet, previously shod in worn sneakers, now displayed genuine leather shoes that, despite being formal, were surprisingly comfortable. Hannah observed the transformation with discreet satisfaction. It wasn't just about the clothes. Ethan's posture had changed, as if the new look had awakened a dormant confidence. "What do you think?" she asked while the tailor made the final adjustments to the pants hem. "It's different," he replied, still absorbing the image in the mirror. "I never thought I'd wear something like this." "It's perfect," declared Hannah. "We'll take 3 complete sets, including what he's wearing." The saleswoman smiled, clearly satisfied with the generous sale. "Certainly, ma'am. Would you like anything else? Perhaps some casual items for the young man?" Half an hour later, they left the store carrying several bags containing not only formal attire, but also good quality jeans, t-shirts, sweaters, and even a coat for Boston's cold days. Ethan felt simultaneously grateful and disconcerted by the unexpected generosity. "You didn't need to buy all this," he murmured as they walked back to the hotel. "The agreement was just for work clothes." Hannah shrugged. "Consider it an investment. Besides, we need to visit some more casual places too." She checked her watch. "I have to go to my meeting now. Can we meet at 2 p.m. in the lobby to start our cultural tour?" "Sure," replied Ethan, still a bit dazed by the morning's events. "I'll be there." "Perfect. And Ethan," she added with a touch of seriousness in her voice, "keep your advance safe. Don't mention our arrangement to anyone, okay? I prefer discretion." The boy nodded, intrigued by the request but without questioning it. "You can trust me." As he watched Hannah get into a taxi, Ethan tried to process how his life had changed so drastically in less than 24 hours. Yesterday he was just another invisible boy on Boston's streets. Today he wore clothes he never dreamed of owning and had a job with an international executive. He walked to a nearby square and sat on a bench, finally opening the envelope Hannah had given him. His eyes widened as he counted the money. It was more than he could earn in months of small odd jobs around the city. With this amount, he could rent a room, buy food for several weeks, maybe even invest in books and online courses. But something in Hannah's behavior intrigued him. Why had she chosen him specifically? Why such generosity toward a complete stranger? And why the request for discretion? As he carefully stored the money in the inner pocket of his new blazer, Ethan couldn't imagine that his life was about to change in ways that not even his most fantastic books could predict. The casual encounter at Amber Restaurant had been just the first chapter of a story that would involve secrets, revelations, and profound transformations for both of them. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan immersed himself in a universe that he had previously only glimpsed through car windows passing by or shop windows he never dared to cross. His new role as Hannah's assistant and informal interpreter opened doors for him, literally, to a Boston that existed parallel to his own, so close and yet completely inaccessible until now. During the day, he accompanied Hannah to contemporary art galleries, independent cultural centers, local artist studios, and alternative spaces that buzzed with Boston's creativity. His afternoons were filled with conversations about art, literature and music, both in English and French, as they walked the cobblestone streets of the historic center or traversed the green corridors of the public garden. Ethan's transformation went far beyond new clothes. His posture, his way of speaking, even his gaze had changed. The confidence that had always existed within him, the one that had kept him alive and sane on the streets, now manifested externally, as if it finally had permission to exist. On a particularly sunny afternoon, after visiting a photography exhibition at the Museum of Fine Arts, Hannah suggested they have coffee at the Institute of Contemporary Art, affectionately known as the ICA due to its distinctive architecture. Sitting in the cafeteria with a view of the sculpture garden, Hannah observed Ethan with interest as he spoke animatedly about the exhibition they had just seen. "You have a very sensitive eye for the arts," she commented, interrupting the boy's enthusiastic flow. "You can see layers that many people with formal training don't perceive." Ethan blushed slightly at the compliment. "It's just that I like to observe. When you spend a lot of time alone, you learn to pay attention to details." Hannah nodded, thoughtful. "You know, Ethan, I'm impressed with you. Not just with your talent for languages, but with your ability to adapt. Many adults would have difficulty navigating between such different worlds as you have been doing. The boy fidgeted with his cup of hot chocolate, embarrassed by the praise. It's not that difficult. It's like reading a book in another language. At first it seems impossible, but then you start to recognize patterns, to understand the unwritten rules. A perfect analogy, smiled Hannah. But still it's remarkable. A comfortable silence settled between them, interrupted only by the soft sound of conversations around them and the occasional clinking of cups. It was Ethan who finally spoke, his voice more hesitant than usual. Hannah, may I ask you something? Of course, why me? Why did you choose me for this job? There are professional interpreters in Boston, qualified people who... Hannah set her cup down delicately, her gaze becoming distant for a moment. Intuition, perhaps. Or maybe I recognized something in you that reminded me of someone. Before Ethan could ask more, Hannah's cell phone rang. She checked the number and her expression subtly changed. I need to take this. Excuse me. She stood up and stepped away a few paces, speaking in French too fast for Ethan to fully comprehend. He caught fragments, something about documents, deadlines, and a name, Lawrence. The tension in Hannah's voice was palpable, even from a distance. When she returned to the table, her countenance had hardened slightly. Change of plans. I need to go back to the hotel for an urgent video conference. On the way back, Hannah remained unusually silent, responding to Ethan's questions with monosyllables. Something had changed after that phone call, and the boy felt the emotional distance growing between them, like a door closing softly. When they arrived at the hotel, Hannah gave Ethan his payment for the day and informed him that she wouldn't need him the following day. I have internal commitments all day. We can meet again on Friday at 10 a.m. Ethan nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. He had become accustomed to the daily routine with Hannah, and more than that, had begun to genuinely appreciate her company. Is everything okay? If you need help with anything, Hannah forced a smile. Everything's under control. I just need to resolve some boring corporate issues. Enjoy your day off. As he watched Hannah disappear through the hotel's revolving doors, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something important had been left unsaid. There were moments when he caught a distant look in her eyes, as if she were searching for something or someone in his face. The next day, without commitments with Hannah, Ethan decided to visit his favorite place in Boston, the public library. Wearing new clothes but opting for a more casual look, dark jeans and a navy blue pullover, he climbed the steps of the historic building, feeling a strange mixture of belonging and displacement. This had been his refuge for years, but now he was returning as a different person. Ethan? My God, is that really you? The familiar voice made him turn. Ms. Margaret, the librarian who had welcomed him so many times, looked at him with amazement. She was a woman in her early 60s, with grey hair always tied in a discreet bun, and lively eyes behind classic frame glasses. Hello, Ms. Margaret, he replied, suddenly shy. I almost didn't recognize you. These new clothes, and you look different. Taller, perhaps? She approached, examining him with that maternal gaze she had always reserved for him. I haven't seen you in almost 2 weeks. We were worried. The use of the plural didn't go unnoticed by Ethan. We were. Me and the folks from the Social Assistance Center. They came here asking about you. They said they have a spot in the youth shelter program for young people in street situations. Ethan felt a tightness in his stomach. He had escaped from the social assistance system several times, preferring the uncertainty of the streets to the rigid structure of shelters. I'm fine. Miss Margaret, actually I'm working. The librarian's eyes widened. Working? Where? Oh, it's a temporary job. I'm serving as an interpreter for a French executive who's visiting the city. Margaret seemed simultaneously impressed and concerned. French interpreter? That's surprising. How did you get this opportunity? Ethan told a summarized version of his encounter with Hannah at Amber Restaurant, omitting some details as per her request for discretion. That explains the new clothes, commented Margaret, still with a touch of skepticism in her voice. But Ethan, you need to be careful. Not everyone has good intentions. Hannah isn't like that, defended the boy with more vehemence than he intended. She really needs help with the language, and she's paying me fairly. The librarian nodded, not entirely convinced. "If you say so. Anyway, I'm happy you're doing well. And know that you'll always have a place here." She paused, as if deciding whether to continue. "Oh, I almost forgot. A new book on French art history arrived that I thought you'd like. It's set aside on my desk." Ethan's face lit up. Even with all the recent changes in his life, his love for books remained unwavering. He spent the following hours immersed in the colorful pages of the book, absorbing information about French artistic movements and their global influences. It was knowledge that now had practical application in his conversations with Hannah. By dusk, Ethan left the library and walked aimlessly through the downtown streets. With the money he had received, he could easily rent a room in a boarding house, but something prevented him from taking that step. Perhaps it was the temporary nature of his work with Hannah. She had mentioned she would stay in Boston for only 2 more weeks. Or perhaps it was a deeper fear, the fear of getting used to a comfort that could be withdrawn at any moment. His steps led him, almost unconsciously, to the street of the Magnifique Hotel. He stopped on the opposite sidewalk, observing the movement of luxury cars and well-dressed guests coming and going. In one of the upper floors, Hannah was in her important video conference dealing with corporate issues that seemed to have disturbed her. That's when he noticed a black car parking in front of the hotel. A tall man, in an impeccable suit and with graying hair at the temples, hurriedly got out and entered the lobby. There was something in his posture, in the way he moved, that captured Ethan's attention. The man seemed tense, almost urgent. Driven by a curiosity that even he didn't fully understand, Ethan crossed the street and entered the hotel, maintaining a discreet distance. The lobby was full enough that his presence didn't immediately attract attention, especially now that his clothes didn't mark him as an intruder. The man went directly to the reception, speaking in English with a French accent. "I need to see Hannah Bennett immediately." "It's urgent." The receptionist checked something on the computer. "Ms. Bennett left instructions not to be disturbed this afternoon. Mr. Dupont, I can inform her that you're here when she becomes available." "No, you don't understand," insisted the man, lowering his voice. "It's about the Lumiere project. She will want to see me now." Something in the mention of that name made the receptionist reconsider. He made a quick call and, after exchanging a few words, nodded. "Ms. Bennett will receive you in her room. Suite 1204, 12th floor." Ethan watched the man head to the elevator, a strange feeling forming in his chest. Who was he? And why did his visit seem so urgent? Without thinking much about the consequences, Ethan waited a few moments and then took the elevator to the 12th floor. The corridor was silent, thick carpet muffling his steps as he looked for Suite 1204. He found it at the end of the corridor. He approached cautiously, uncertain about what he was doing or why. He didn't intend to spy on Hannah. He trusted her. But there was something about that man in the name Lumiere Project that had awakened an uneasiness he couldn't explain. He stopped a few meters from the door, realizing the insanity of his action. What would he say if he were caught? How would he explain being there without being called? That's when he heard raised voices coming from inside the suite. He couldn't distinguish the exact words, but the tone was of heated discussion. Hannah's voice, normally controlled and soft, sounded agitated, almost anguished. Ethan hesitated, torn between walking away and moving closer. That's when the door abruptly opened, and the man, Dupont, came out hurriedly, his face red with anger. He passed by Ethan without noticing him, muttering something in French that sounded like a curse. Ethan pressed himself against the wall, trying to become invisible, a skill he had perfected on the streets. When Dupont disappeared into the elevator, the boy remained motionless, his heart beating rapidly. Hannah's suite door remained ajar. Through the gap, Ethan could partially see the luxurious interior and, more disturbingly, Hannah sitting in an armchair, her face in her hands in a posture of absolute dejection. It was at that moment that something on the coffee table caught his attention, an open folder with scattered documents and, on top of them, a photograph. Even from a distance, the image paralyzed him. In the photograph, slightly yellowed by time, there was a young woman incredibly similar to Hannah, holding a baby in her arms. And beside her, a man whose features Ethan would recognize anywhere. They were the same ones he saw in the mirror every morning. The ground seemed to disappear beneath his feet. A vertiginous sensation took over his body, as his mind tried to process what his eyes were. Seeing. Involuntarily, he took a step forward, making the wooden floor creak under his weight. Hannah suddenly raised her face, her red eyes meeting Ethan's at the half-open door. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, unnecessary words hanging in the air between them. "You shouldn't be here," she finally said, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Who are you, really?" asked Ethan, slowly entering the suite, his gaze fixed on the photograph on the table. "And who am I to you?" The silence that followed Ethan's question seemed to have physical weight, filling the luxury suite with an almost palpable tension. Hannah remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the boy as if she were seeing a ghost, or perhaps more precisely, as if she were finally seeing something she had been looking for a long time. "Come in and close the door," she said finally, her voice firmer than her trembling gaze suggested. Ethan obeyed automatically, without taking his eyes off the photograph on the table. When the door closed behind him, the click of the lock sounded like the end of one phase of his life and the beginning of another completely unknown one. "Sit down," indicated Hannah, pointing to the armchair opposite hers. The boy advanced slowly through the spacious suite, absorbing details that would have previously captured his attention. The original paintings on the walls, the elegant furniture, the panoramic view of the city through the large windows. Now all of this was merely scenery for the drama unfolding between him and the woman he thought he knew. He sat rigidly on the edge of the armchair, his hands pressed tightly together. Hannah studied him as if memorizing every detail of his face, every angle, every expression. Finally, she sighed deeply and extended her hand to the photograph on the table. This photo was taken in Paris. "In September 2010, she began, her voice controlled, as if reciting a story rehearsed many times. "The woman is my twin sister, Isabella. The man is Carlos Edwards, a Latino-American musician we met during a jazz festival in Montmartre." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "And the baby?" Hannah looked directly into his eyes. "The baby is you, Ethan, son of Isabella and Carlos Edwards." The words hung in the air like frightened birds unable to land. Ethan felt a wave of dizziness, as if the floor were undulating beneath his feet. His mind, always agile, always capable of making connections and finding patterns, now seemed locked on a single thought. He had a family. He had a name beyond Ethan, the street boy. He had a story. "My mother. My father," he murmured, the words sounding strange in his mouth. "Where are they?" "Why, it's a complicated story," interrupted Hannah, her gaze softening. "And painful." She stood up and walked to the minibar, serving water for both. Ethan accepted the glass with trembling hands, realizing only then how dry his mouth was. "Isabella and Carlos fell in love quickly," continued Hannah, sitting back down. "It was one of those intense romances, almost cinematic. She, a French art curator. He, a talented but unknown Latino-American musician. When they discovered they were expecting you, they decided they wanted to raise their child together, despite the cultural differences, despite the distance." She paused, taking a sip of water, as if gathering strength to continue. "Carlos returned to the United States to organize everything, a place for them to live, work opportunities. Isabella stayed in Paris taking care of her pregnancy. The plan was for her to come to America when you were 6 months old. Meanwhile, Carlos traveled frequently between the two countries." Hannah stared at the photograph with a distant gaze. "You were born in Paris, Ethan. Your full name is Ethan Edwards Bennett. Isabella wanted to honor the culture of her child's father, choosing an American name." Ethan absorbed each word like dry earth absorbs rain after a long drought. A name, an origin, pieces of a puzzle he didn't even know he was putting together. "What happened then?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. Hannah's face contracted with an old pain but still alive. "When you were almost 2 years old, Carlos and Isabella finally settled in Boston. He had secured a stable position as a music teacher, and she was beginning to work with local galleries. They were happy, building a life together." She took a deep breath, and Ethan realized they were reaching the crucial point of the story, the moment when everything had changed. On a rainy night, returning from a concert in New York, the car Carlos was traveling in had an accident on the highway. Hannah hesitated, choosing her words. "He didn't survive." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process the information. His father, a man he had never consciously known but whose face was so similar to his own, had departed this world when he was still a baby. And my mother? Isabella? He asked, opening his eyes to face Hannah. You said she left me at an orphanage when I was 2 years old. Why, what happened to her? Hannah turned her gaze to the window, observing the city that slowly lit its lights in the twilight. Isabella never recovered from losing Carlos. They had a rare connection, the kind that transforms a person. When he left, a part of her went with him. She turned to Ethan, her eyes moist. She fell into a deep depression. I tried to help her, brought her back to Paris, sought treatment, but nothing worked. So she simply abandoned me? The question came out more bitter than Ethan intended, but he couldn't contain the wave of resentment that invaded him. It wasn't like that, defended Hannah with surprising firmness. Isabella genuinely believed she was doing what was best for you. In her mental state, she feared being an inadequate mother, harming your development. She convinced herself that you would have better chances being adopted by a stable, loving family. But that didn't happen, retorted Ethan, anger growing along with understanding. I kept jumping from shelter to shelter. Nobody adopted me. I ended up on the streets. Hannah lowered her head, the weight of guilt evident on her shoulders. I know. And there isn't a day that I don't regret not preventing this. I should have fought harder, should have brought you to France with me. You knew. The question sounded like an accusation. You knew where I was all this time? No, replied Hannah, raising her gaze to face him. When Isabella decided to leave you at the orphanage, I was in Africa working on a Lumière project. When I returned and discovered what had happened, it was already too late. You had been registered only as Ethan, without a surname, without complete documentation. Isabella was so distressed that she couldn't provide precise details about where she had left you. Hannah stood up again, walking nervously around the suite. I hired private investigators over the years. I followed false leads, visited orphanages in various American cities. With each failed attempt, Isabella sank deeper into her depression until her voice failed. Until what? Insisted Ethan. 3 years ago, she tried to take her own life, said Hannah, the words coming out with difficulty. She survived, but since then she has been living in a specialized clinic outside Paris. She rarely speaks, rarely recognizes the people around her. But in moments of lucidity, she always asks about you, always repeats that she misses you. Ethan felt hot tears running down his face, the anger now mixed with a deep sadness for the mother he never truly knew. A woman broken by life, destroyed by loss. How did you find me now? He asked, wiping the tears with the back of his hand. Hannah sat back down, suddenly looking exhausted. It was pure coincidence. I'm really here for work. Lumière has a genuine interest in investing in American cultural projects. I chose Boston because it was the city where Carlos and Isabella had settled, where you were born. It was my 11th visit to the United States in the last 10 years, always looking for clues, always hoping for a miracle. She smiled slightly, the first smile since the beginning of that conversation. And then in that rainy restaurant, a street boy appears speaking fluent French, a boy with Isabella's eyes and Carlos's smile. When I heard your name, Ethan, I knew immediately. It was you. It had to be you. Why didn't you tell me right away? Questioned Ethan, still processing the enormity of the revelations. Why this charade of work as an interpreter? I needed to be sure. And I needed to get to know you, to know what kind of person you had become before revealing everything. Besides, Hannah hesitated. I feared your reaction. I feared you would hate me, that you would refuse to listen to me if I simply approached you with the naked truth. Ethan shook his head, a sad smile forming on his lips. I think I would have reacted exactly like that. I probably would have run away at the first opportunity. A reflective silence fell over them. Outside, Boston lit its nightlights, oblivious to the drama unfolding in that hotel room. Who was that man, Dupont? Asked Ethan finally. Lawrence Dupont, Lumière's lawyer and a personal friend of the Bennett family for decades. He came because we finally got the necessary documentation to prove your identity. Original birth certificate, DNA tests confirming kinship with Isabella, everything necessary to regularize your legal situation. Hannah stood up and took a folder of documents from the desk. With this, you can choose your path, Ethan. You can come with me to France, meet your mother, have access to the education you deserve. or you can stay in the United States, but with the financial and educational support you should have had from the beginning. She extended the folder to him, which he took with trembling hands. The choice is yours. Entirely yours. Ethan opened the folder, finding documents in English and French, some with his name, Ethan Edwards Bennett, printed in official letters. It was surreal to see that name, that identity he never knew he possessed. Why did DuPont seem so angry when he left here? Hannah sighed. Lawrence believes I'm making emotional decisions, not rational ones. He fears the legal complications, the possible repercussions for Lumiere's image if this story comes to light. More than that, she hesitated. He thinks I'm trying to replace Isabella in your life, that my motivations are selfish. And are they? The question came out unfiltered, straight from Ethan's heart. Hannah looked at him for a long time before answering. Maybe partially. I've always felt that I failed my sister. Failed you. Finding you, helping you is a form of redemption, but it's also more than that. You're my nephew, Ethan, my blood. The only family I have left besides Isabella. She approached, sitting beside him on the sofa, but maintaining a respectful distance. I don't expect you to forgive me immediately, or to accept me as family. I only ask that you give me the chance to correct the mistakes of the past, to offer you what should always have been yours by right. Ethan closed the folder of documents, his mind a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. Anger at the abandonment, sadness at the tragic story of his parents, confusion about his newly discovered identity, and surprisingly, a tenuous feeling of hope, the possibility of a different future, of belonging somewhere to someone. I need time, he finally said, standing up. I need to process all of this. Hannah nodded, respecting his need for space. I perfectly understand. I'll be in Boston for 10 more days. Take all the time you need. Ethan walked to the door, firmly holding the folder with his true identity. Before leaving, he turned to Hannah, a final question lingering on his lips. What was she like? My mother before all this. A genuine smile illuminated Hannah's face for the first time since the beginning of that conversation. Isabella was radiant, vibrant, passionate about art, about music, about life. She had a laugh that was contagious in any environment. She was stubborn, much more than me, and had strong opinions about everything. She loved to dance, even without music. And when she met your father, her voice softened. I never saw her as happy as in the days they spent together. You were the culmination of that love, Ethan. Never doubt that. The words touched something deep inside him. Throughout his life, Ethan had felt like an accident, a mistake, someone disposable. The idea of having been wanted, of having been born from love, was as strange as it was comforting. Thank you, he murmured before leaving, carrying with him not only documents, but the weight and lightness of a newly discovered identity. The Boston Public Library was particularly quiet that Monday morning. Ethan walked between the familiar shelves, his fingers sliding over the spines of the books, like someone saying goodbye to old friends. He had spent the entire weekend there, taking refuge among printed words, trying to process the avalanche of revelations that had transformed his life in a matter of minutes. He found his usual corner, a discreet table near the window, partially hidden by a shelf of rarely consulted encyclopedias. He sat down and took from his new backpack, another gift from Hannah, the folder with the documents that proved his true identity. He opened it for the 100th time, studying each detail as if he could extract from them the answer to the question that tormented him. What to do now? I thought I'd find you here. The familiar voice made Ethan look up. Miss Margaret was observing him with an affectionate smile, although her eyes revealed concern. Good morning, Miss Margaret, he greeted, quickly closing the folder. The librarian pulled up a chair and sat across from him, something she rarely did during her shift. You look different. It's not just the new clothes. There's something in your gaze. Ethan took a deep breath. He needed to talk to someone, and Miss Margaret was the closest thing he had to a maternal figure in his life. Until a few days ago, at least, I discovered who I am, he said simply, reopening the folder and showing her the documents. The woman's eyes widened as she examined the certificates, passports, and photographs. My God, Ethan, this is extraordinary. In the following minutes, he summarized the story that Hannah had told him, the parents who met in Paris, the accident that claimed his father, his mother's depression, The abandonment that wasn't exactly abandonment. And finally, the reunion with his aunt. Miss Margaret listened in silence, just nodding occasionally. When Ethan finished, she adjusted her glasses and looked at him seriously. "And what do you feel about all this?" The question, seemingly simple, hit Ethan like a wave. What did he feel? Anger, confusion, hope, fear, an emotional storm that he could barely name, let alone understand. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice almost a whisper. "Part of me wants to believe everything, wants to go to France, meet my mother, have a different life. Another part is afraid." Afraid of what exactly? Ethan stared at the window, observing Boston's blue sky so familiar. Afraid that it's not true. Or worse, that it is true, but that it doesn't work out. What if my mother doesn't recognize me? What if I don't adapt to life there? What if Hannah regrets having found me? So Margaret smiled with understanding. "These are legitimate fears, Ethan. But let me ask you, what do you have to lose?" The question hung in the air like a leaf that hesitates before landing. What did he have to lose? His freedom on the streets? The daily uncertainty about where he would sleep or what he would eat? The loneliness that had accompanied him for as long as he could remember? "I guess nothing," he replied with sudden clarity. "I have nothing to lose." "And what do you have to gain?" "Everything," murmured Ethan. "A family, a future." As Margaret nodded, satisfied. "It seems you already have your answer." She stood up, adjusting her librarian badge. "Know that regardless of what you choose, I'm proud of you, Ethan. I always knew there was something special about you. The way you absorbed knowledge, how you clung to books as if they were life rafts. Now I understand why. You're the son of a musician and an art curator. Creativity and culture are in your blood." Before he could respond, she walked away, returning to work, leaving him with thoughts that now flowed with new clarity. That afternoon, Ethan found himself again in front of the Magnifique Hotel. This time, he entered without hesitation, heading to the reception with a confidence that was still partially feigned. "Good afternoon. I'd like to speak with Ms. Hannah Bennett." The receptionist, the same one who had received him with distrust on his first day as an assistant, now greeted him with a respectful nod. "Certainly, Mr. Ethan. Ms. Bennett left instructions for you to be announced immediately. I'll inform her of your arrival." While waiting, Ethan observed his reflection in the mirrored surfaces of the lobby. The street boy was still there, hidden behind new clothes and a more confident posture. But now there was something more, a spark of purpose, of identity. Ethan Edwards Bennett. A name, a story, a belonging. Ethan. Hannah appeared in the lobby, her face showing the effort to contain her anxiety. She wore a discreet outfit in shades of grey, her hair tied in a simple bun. She seemed simultaneously powerful and vulnerable. "Can we talk?" he asked. She nodded, leading him to the hotel bar, practically empty at that hour. They sat at a secluded table, where privacy was guaranteed. Hannah ordered a coffee for herself and a hot chocolate for Ethan, remembering the preference he had shown days before. "How are you feeling?" she asked after a moment of silence. "Confused," admitted Ethan with honesty, "but also lighter, in a way. As if I had found the missing piece in a puzzle that I didn't even know I was trying to put together." Hannah smiled slightly. "I understand the feeling. I have some questions," he said, taking a small notebook from his pocket. Hannah noticed with a pang of emotion that he had methodically organized his thoughts, writing topics and questions, exactly as Isabella used to do. "Of course. Ask whatever you want." For the next hour, Ethan interrogated Hannah about practical details. What would life be like in France? Where would he live? How would his education be? And the most difficult of all, what would the meeting with his mother be like? Hannah answered everything with a frankness that he appreciated. She didn't try to smooth over the difficulties, the culture shock, the challenges of learning a new educational system, the uncertainty about how Isabella would react to seeing him. But she also painted a picture of the possibilities. Studying at one of the best schools in Paris, having access to world-class museums, theaters, libraries, the chance to develop his natural talents for languages and arts. "You wouldn't be alone," Hannah assured. "I have a spacious apartment near the Jardin du Luxembourg. You would have your own room, your own space. And we would be close to the clinic where Isabella is. We could visit her regularly at a pace that's comfortable for both of you." Ethan nodded, absorbing the information. "And if..." If it doesn't work out? If I want to come back to the United States, then we'll come back, replied Hannah without hesitation. This isn't a prison, Ethan. It's an opportunity. If Paris doesn't work for you, we can explore other options. The important thing is that from now on you have choices. You have a support network. You have a family. Family. The word still sounded strange, almost mythical. Throughout his life, Ethan had built walls around himself, learning not to depend on anyone, not to trust, not to expect. The idea of belonging to someone, of having someone who genuinely cared about his well-being, was as frightening as it was seductive. I have one last question, he said, closing his notebook. Why do you care so much? Why all this effort to find me, to offer me all this? Hannah looked at him for a long time before answering. Her eyes, so similar to the ones Ethan now knew he had inherited from his mother, shone with contained emotion. Because I promised my sister, that last night before she left you at the orphanage, that if one day she regretted her decision, I would do everything to fix things. Her voice faltered slightly. Because in a way you are part of me too, Ethan, and because even in the brief moments we spent together, I learned to admire the extraordinary person you have become. Despite all the adversities, a knot formed in Ethan's throat. He wasn't accustomed to hearing words of affirmation, of appreciation. On the streets, his intelligence and talents were at best curiosities, at worst targets for ridicule. I accept, he finally said, the words coming out like a weight being released from his shoulders. I want to go to France. I want to meet my mother. I want to try to have a family. Hannah's smile illuminated her face in a way that made her look even more like the woman in the photograph, like Isabella. Without thinking, she extended her hand across the table, lightly touching Ethan's fingers. I'm so happy with your decision, she said with a choked voice. I promise to do everything in my power to make it work. Ethan nodded, feeling a strange mixture of fear and expectation. When would we leave? I have one more week of commitments here. We also need to finalize your documentation, passport, visa, school transfer. I would say in 2 weeks we would be ready to travel. 2 weeks, repeated Ethan, thoughtful. Enough time to say goodbye. Say goodbye to whom? Asked Hannah, genuinely curious. A small smile touched Ethan's lips. To the public library, to the public garden at dawn, to Franklin Park, and to Ms. Margaret, of course. Hannah smiled, understanding. Places and people that were important to you. We can visit them together if you want. I would like to meet this librarian who played such a significant role in your life. In the days that followed, Ethan experienced an emotional roller coaster. The excitement for the adventure that awaited him alternated with moments of doubt and fear. Hannah, noticing his agitation, suggested they begin to concretely plan the move. They bought suitcases, discussed the Parisian climate, talked about the school where he would study. On a particularly significant afternoon, they visited the public library together, where Hannah finally met Ms. Margaret. The two women, so different in their origins and circumstances, connected immediately through their shared affection for Ethan. He's special, said Margaret, as they watched Ethan in the French literature section, selecting books he would like to read before leaving. I always knew there was a greater purpose for him. Hannah nodded. I am eternally grateful that you were there when we couldn't be. Promise to take good care of him? Gers asked the librarian, with the direct frankness of someone who had, in a way, been Ethan's guardian for years. With my life, replied Hannah, with equal sincerity. On the eve of their departure, Ethan asked Hannah to accompany him to one last place, Amber Restaurant, where it had all begun. The establishment remained as elegant as the first time, but now, entering alongside his aunt, Ethan no longer felt the displacement of before. Something had fundamentally changed in his perception of himself and the world around him. Andrew, the maitre d', recognized them immediately, leading them to the same table by the window where they had sat during that first encounter. It was from him that the local press had eventually discovered the story, albeit with details altered to protect Isabella's privacy, about the street boy who spoke French and the foreign executive. It's an honor to receive you again, he said with a respectful bow, especially now that we know of the happy coincidence that reunited you. Ethan smiled. Coincidence, destiny, or simply a rainy afternoon in the right place, I'm still trying to understand. As they dined, observing the fine rain falling outside, almost a reproduction of that first day, Hannah observed the remarkable transformation in her nephew. It wasn't just the physical appearance. Although the well-cut hair and appropriate clothes enhanced his natural resemblance to Carlos Edwards, it was something deeper, a spark in his eyes, a firmness in his gestures, as if he had finally found his place in the world. "What are you thinking about?" asked Ethan, noticing her contemplative gaze. "About how life is surprising," she replied honestly, "about how sometimes the most tortuous paths lead us exactly where we should be." Ethan nodded, perfectly understanding the sentiment. "I'm afraid," he admitted, lowering his voice. "Afraid to meet her. My mother." "It's natural," said Hannah gently. "Isabella would be nervous too. But know that even in her most difficult moments, she never stopped loving you, Ethan. The walls of her room at the clinic are covered with drawings of you, as she imagines you would be now." "And what are these drawings like?" he asked with genuine curiosity. Hannah smiled. "Surprisingly accurate, actually. As if, even at a distance, she could feel how you were growing, developing. There's something in the connection between mother and son that transcends physical separation, I think." The dinner proceeded with lighter conversations about Paris, about favorite books, about the small cultural differences that Ethan would soon experience. When they finished, the rain had ceased, leaving Boston's streets with that particular shine of a freshly washed city. "Tomorrow, Paris," said Ethan, as they walked back to the hotel where he was now also staying, in the room adjoining Hannah's. "Tomorrow, a new beginning," she corrected gently. That night, in his hotel room, Ethan remained awake for a long time, looking out the window at the city that had been his home, a hard home, often cruel, but the only one he had known. He thought of all the nights he had spent in the open, the days of hunger, the cold that seemed to penetrate to his bones in Boston's winters. He also thought of the small moments of beauty he had found, the dawn at the public garden, the sensation of discovery when understanding a new language, the occasional kindness of strangers. In his backpack, now very different from the one with which he wandered the streets, he had carefully stored some treasures, the old CD of French songs that Miss Margaret had given him years ago, a small diary where he had recorded his thoughts since discovering his true identity, and the original photograph of his parents with him as a baby, which Hannah had insisted he keep. Paris was a mystery, a new chapter waiting to be written. But for the first time in his life, Ethan would not face this unknown alone. He had a story, a name, a family, imperfect, fractured by time and circumstances, but real. And more importantly, he had a future beyond the streets, beyond daily survival. A future where his talents and his intelligence would have space to flourish. As sleep finally began to envelop him, Ethan thought of his mother, of Isabella, the woman in the photograph whose eyes were so similar to his own. He imagined the moment when he would see her for the first time, not as a lost childhood memory, but as the young man he had become. Would there be recognition in those eyes? Would there be redemption for both in this late reunion? He didn't have answers yet, but for the first time he had hope, and for now that was enough. The next morning, when the taxi stopped in front of Logan International Airport, Ethan took a deep breath, adjusting the backpack on his shoulder. Hannah was already waiting for him at the entrance, tickets in hand, an encouraging smile on her face. "Ready?" she asked, extending